Thank you, Alan Sarenberg, for your very kind presentation. It would not take me 40 years to come back because you have treated us very, very nicely. I just Googled, and it turns out that the Califas are still living in Mexico. So if you go down to the southern Californias, you will find them. So let's hope on your way back to your trip, you actually visit Baja, and some of the Califas are still living there. It's going to be less than a week before we get a chance to see most of you in Mexico again. We are very, very happy that Governor Brown, that his wife Ann Brown, has decided to go to Mexico on this trip that highlights everything that is good and important between the U.S.-Mexico relationship, between California and Mexico, and I'm sure that that visit will help us bring even closer. The bilateral trade between our countries is probably amongst the most integrated trade in all of the world. Mexico and the U.S. trade $1 million every minute. We trade $1.4 billion every day. That means that we're trading more than $500 billion every year. That is one of the most important trading relationships bilaterally of anywhere else in the world. In fact, for the U.S., there is only one relationship that is more important, and that is the U.S.-Canada relationship. And at the rate we're going, if Governor Brown takes another 30 years to come back to Mexico, when he does, the Mexico-U.S. relationship would be larger than the Canada-Mexico relationship. Mexico's economy should be larger than Canada's economy within a generation. So we will be part of the G7 that California is a part of already. So it will be some 6 other countries plus California and Mexico that are part of that new G8 within a generation. Mexico buys more from the U.S. than Germany, the UK, France, Netherlands, and Belgium combined. We buy more from the US. We actually buy twice as much from the US as China does. We buy 4 times more from the US than Brazil does. Mexico is the first trade partner to 22 states, including California. Mexico is the most important trading partner to California. In 2013, we traded amongst ourselves more than $60 billion. That is the same that the U.S. trades all of the U.S., the West, and that part of the East where this college that I studied in is at. So they trade with the Netherlands. So in and of itself, the trade relationship with California, it's important. Mexico trades more with California than it trades with China. The Mexico and California border that we share, this 145-mile with 7 crossing points, is arguably the busiest land border crossing in all of the world. Every time that Mexico exports $1 to anywhere in the world, we are purchasing 40 cents from the U.S. That compares to what happens when China exports $1. Only 4 cents of that value comes from U.S.-made goods. So we truly have a North American chain that is integrated to generate value. So what's good for Mexico, what's good for the U.S., is good for the North American community. If you look outside of the energy sector, the 10 largest American firms all have an important presence in Mexico. The last years, Mexico invests more in the U.S. than what Spain does. We actually invest twice as much in the U.S. as Spain. We invest about half as much as Italy, 1/3 more than China, and Mexican foreign investment last year was as large as what the French invested in the U.S. We have tried to translate all of this into good and meaningful political dialogue with the U.S. We are grateful that Michael is here because he was a very big part, Michael Camuñez, of this transition. We now have a high-level economic dialogue with the U.S. that allows us to promote competitiveness and connectivity, a dialogue that should result in more growth, more productivity, more innovation, a dialogue that results in us recognizing each other as partners for regional and global leadership. Part of what we talk about are things like, for example, the San Diego-Tijuana International Airport, which is going to be very important for the dynamism of the region, which will allow part of the overflow from the San Diego Airport to go into Tijuana and people to cross over by that pedestrian bridge, and which is something that we should be doing more about. We should be recognizing that our border is a source of competitiveness, that our border is part of the way of life of a region, that every time somebody crosses over, every time a merchandise crosses from Mexico to the U.S. or back, and in some cases, for example, in the automotive industry, the merchandise crosses about 12 times before when they're intermediate goods before turning into final goods, we should be doing more about. Mexico and the U.S., Mexico and California should be talking about entrepreneurship and innovation, which we are trying to do through Mosaic. We should be talking about higher education. All of the numbers in terms of the relationship between Mexico and the U.S. are important and big, except for education. There's only 14,000 Mexicans studying in the U.S. There's only 3,000 Americans studying in Mexico. Those are shockingly small numbers which we should be trying to increase so that we can have mutual understanding, so we can develop a shared vision and educational cooperation, so that we could boost mobility in a region that will allow us to prepare our workforce for the global challenges that we now have. Through the University of California initiative, we're trying to get 1,000 Mexicans to participate in internships and short-term research in all of the 10 campuses of the UC system. We already have seen, even within this trip, Mexicans studying in Silicon Valley and UC Davis, and that is something that we should strive to make increase. There are 34 million people with Mexican roots in the U.S. 2/3 of them were actually born now in the U.S. There's almost 1 million Americans living in Mexico. That's 5 times as many Americans living in Mexico as there are living in Canada. So this sense of community is something that is being credited both sides of the border. And this is a pattern that has changed in the case of Mexico and the U.S. If you look at the number of Mexicans living here in the U.S., born in Mexico in 2007, that number was 11.8 Mexicans. If you look at that number today, it's exactly the same. That means that since 2007, net migration of Mexico to the U.S. has been basically flat. That is a number that has not grown. And that means that only 7% of Mexican immigrants came to live in the U.S. after 2007. That compares with 44% that came to live in the U.S. in the period between 1996 and 2007. So the dynamic of the relationship, the dynamic of the migration dialogue has to take all of that into consideration. The migration flows are different in nature, they're different in sign. You have some years where migration actually goes back into Mexico rather than the other way around. The migration has to take into consideration that our country is being transformed at a very important pace, that Mexico is engaging in a very far-ranging reform agenda, that we have taken advantage of our stable macroeconomic environment, our stable inflation, stable unemployment amongst the lowest in the OECD, and we have worked in transforming every single part of the Mexican economy, our labor market, our financial market, our energy market, our telecommunication market, and that has changed and transformed the way that we look Mexico in the future. Mexicans in the U.S. are doing well. About 12% of business owners from outside of the U.S. are Mexican. That's more than the business owners from India, Korea, Cuba, China, or Vietnam. Univision is now rated #1 for viewers between 18 and 49. So that means we're looking ahead to a time where Mexico and the U.S. will benefit not just from remittances, but from an increased network of cross-border ties between our society. Lack of immigration reform is holding all of these prospects back, and that is something that should concern us all. The government of Mexico is committed to jointly address migration as a regional phenomenon. We have played a leadership role in the efforts surrounding the unaccompanied minors phenomenon that we have seen and have generated the compassion of most. President Peña Nieto and President Obama have agreed to continue tackling the increase in unaccompanied minor children through a regional perspective under the principle of shared responsibilities. We want to ensure that the human rights are respected, that the best interest of the unaccompanied minor is a common priority, and that is what drives our joint efforts. We recently announced in Mexico a Frontera Sur program that will strengthen our capabilities. We have appointed a special commissioner for the southern border to that effect, and we are working with Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras to foster economic opportunities and development within the region. When Governor Brown goes to Mexico, accompanied by many of you next week, he will go to a country that has a democracy with strong institutions. We have had orderly and peaceful transitions during the last 80 years. He will go to one of the largest economies in the world, to the second largest in Latin America, the 14th largest in the world. He will go to a country that has an economy with macroeconomic stability, with sound public finances, with autonomous monetary policy, with a flexible exchange rate and a robust financial system. He will visit an open economy, one of the most open economies in all of the world, the fifth largest, most open economy in all of the G20 that has access to more than 1.2 billion consumers. He will visit a country where there are young and talented people. We are graduating every year more than 100,000 engineers. He will go to a country that amongst the G20 has the fifth largest percentage of high-tech exports. When Mexico exports today, 30% of that is comprised of high-tech exports. Only 8% of what Mexico exports today is related to oil. He will go to a country that is a global high-added value logistic hub. He will go to a country that is committed to the rule of law. He will visit a country that has a new drive for domestic transportation, that has approved, that has made our democracy work for us, and that we have approved a very ambitious set of structural reforms that will allow us to foster a more competitive economy. We've done, as I said, labor, economic competition, telecommunications, financial, fiscal, and energy reform. He will go to a country that has renewed its political institutions in order to strengthen them. He will go to a country that has made expanding social rights one of the priorities to generate better inclusion and more equality. He will go to a country where him, his wife, and the delegation that accompanies him will have a very good time. So thank you.